What's the deal with Pharaoh's heart in Exodus? Hi guys, this is R.A. Sweeney answering your questions on the Bible. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the comments where I've got links to my website and social media there. You can reach out to me on those. I'd love to hear your questions so I can answer them as well. Today, wanted to answer the question of what's going on with Pharaoh's heart in Exodus. I think a lot of people have noticed that it talks about God hardening Pharaoh's heart in the story of the plagues, which seems really kind of ungodlike. It's not really the way he portrays himself, that he's going to be just like shoving people away from him and shoving people into destruction. That's not we get into some of that with like end time stuff, but it doesn't really fit with a lot of other things. So wanted to address what's going on there. So when we look at the plagues of Egypt, there's this repeated conversation about Pharaoh's heart. And it's always translated as hard, which is interesting because the Hebrew word there it comes from the root of kavod, which is like weight. It really boils down to weight. So it can be like something is heavy. It could be something's weighing something down. But it also, when you think about, I always think of like Marty McFly is talking, oh, that's heavy. And then Doc's like, is there a gravitational anomaly? Which is hilarious. But this idea of like important things are heavy, and we still say that today, like that's a weighty matter and things like that. And so that's the Hebrew word that gets used there. So he's got like a weighty heart, which could also be like a significant or an important heart, like he's lifting it up, like it often gets translated as like glory or glorifying too. So kind of interesting there. When you look at the Greek translation of it, the Septuagint, it really goes with that like weighed down. So it's more like his heart's becoming like a spiritual anchor for him. So that's interesting, but I'm going to stick with hard just because that's what most of our translations talk about. And I think it's fine for at least what we're going to be talking about. So when we look at the plagues themselves, we're all familiar with a 10 plague sort of setup, which I mean, it's true, but I feel like there's more going on. So it really starts before that with a couple of introductory things where God sends Moses to do the leprosy thing with his hand. He throws the staff down and everything says it turns into a snake. It turns into a sea dragon, which is way cooler. So he does some demonstrations because Pharaoh's like, who's this God that I should listen to him? And so he's showing him this is who God is. So there's those two demonstrations. And then there's the 10 that we typically think of, from the turning the Nile to blood all the way through the death of the firstborn. But you could also argue that the passing through the Sea of Reeds is another demonstration of God's power. But you've got this kind of tight-knit little 10 there in the middle that tends to get focused on. I have written in a few places about when you see the 10s, a lot of times you've got kind of a subset there where you've got like 9 attempts to do something and then a 10th final one when we haven't reached the goal. And so I've argued that the 10 plagues, and really when you look at the way it's broken up, there's a big interlude before you get to the death of the firstborn. It's a couple chapters, or at least, like a chapter and a half at least of, depending on how you look at it, of this. Let's talk about what's going to happen and the Passover feast and all those things. So you've got this little break. You've got the 9 plagues that are meant to accomplish something. It didn't happen. And then there's the interlude, and then there's this 10th final one that like, okay, we need to get this done. It's going to happen. So in that 9 plague pocket, when you look at what's going on, like everybody focuses of God's just like beating down Egypt, of just one blow after the next, just dialing up the intensity, like he's laying down the law. And I don't think that that's a fair way to read that passage. When you look at the way it starts out, like God comes and he says, hey, through Moses, he says, hey, let the people go. I'm telling you, this is what needs to happen. And he says, I don't care what you have to say. I'm not going to listen. God demonstrates his power in very innocuous ways, just displays of power. And he's like, don't care. And then when you look at how the plagues progress, every single one has a warning. Hey, let this happen. Otherwise, something bad's going to happen. And there's the opportunity for Pharaoh to change course and do what God has asked him to do. And so I would argue what we're really seeing there is not just God just beating down Egypt, it's much more of repeated invitations for Pharaoh to repent. And it even talks about in the narrative that he kept sinning. He keeps sinning. He's not turning around. He's not repenting of his sin. He keeps sinning. And so I think that's important. So he has the opportunity just by the request. He refuses. He gets some demonstrations. He refuses. And then God starts, this is going to happen. I'm forcing this to happen, but I don't want to be harsh about this. So I'm going to start out small and I'm going to escalate until I get it to happen. And by the time we get to the 10th, really what we see is God saying, fine, you've chosen to not let this happen. So this is what's going to happen in response. And so it's really just repeated invitations to repent rather than just God just dialing up just blow after blow and trying to demonstrate his power. God doesn't need to demonstrate his power. He just is trying to get Pharaoh to hop on board with the plan. So when we look at those the 9 plagues there, God hardening Pharaoh's heart is the one thing that doesn't really fit that narrative. But when we look really close, there's the 9 plagues in that block. And in those 9 plagues, we see 3 different ways that it talks about Pharaoh's heart hardening. Sometimes it says that his heart was hardened. There is nobody identified that's doing the hardening there. It's just, it was hardened. And the question is, who? Who did the verb in that sentence? There are times where it says that Pharaoh himself hardened his heart. So there we have the actor, the verb, and then the heart that's being hardened. And then there are times that it says God hardens Pharaoh's heart. So we've got 3 different actors there. One of them remains a mystery. And I think it's interesting, the way it breaks out is first you've got the mystery actor hardens his heart. That's the very first plague. It says his heart was hardened. Then Pharaoh hardens his heart. Then the mystery actor hardens his heart. Then Pharaoh hardens his heart. Then mystery actor again. And it's not until the 6th one that we finally see that God hardens Pharaoh's heart, which I feel like that alone is significant. He has not hardened, like he's been hardening his own heart. He's been having his heart hardened. God's not the actor in that for the first half of the plagues. God's trying to get him to repent, and he's saying, like, I want you to repent. And so I feel like it's important to really focus on who that mystery actor is. And when you read through the plagues, if you know your Egyptian mythology, which I assume most people don't, because why would we, unless you're a nerd like me, it's actually kind of comical, the word choice that gets used there, because all the plagues are designed to attack the Egyptian gods. And the word choice is really interesting, in terms of like how things come about, the way that the plagues unfold different things. And so, like the first one, the Nile turning to blood, there's a Nile goddess that is made to bleed. You've got, which is interesting too, because Osiris, the Egyptian god, gets chopped up and thrown in the Nile. So it's, kind of drawing on that imagery. The second one is frogs. There's a frog-headed god of fertility that the frogs are said to be multiplying. There is a god of the earth, like the earth material, dirt, sort of. I don't think he'd like being called the god of the dirt, but that's what he's the god of, like the land material. And one of the plagues comes from the dust being thrown up in the air. So the dirt gets thrown up into the air, and it's like that god is being dispersed in the air, and then that becomes a plague. So it's really well juxtaposed with the gods of Egypt and some of the mythology around them. So it's really poking at those gods. And so if you know the mythology, you can really see that in the plagues. But even in that little interlude between plague 9 and plague 10, God specifically says, I am going to kill the firstborn, I'm going to bring judgment on Egypt, and I am going to judge the gods of Egypt. So he's not punishing Pharaoh. He's not beating down Pharaoh. He's beating down the gods of Egypt, which I think is important. Pharaoh has aligned himself with those gods, and God is saying, like, I'm just going to rip this god off of you. I'm going to rip this god off of you. And the progression of the hardening is the mystery actor who the gods aren't really named through the plagues, but you can see them there, and then they're named afterward. You find out, oh, okay, maybe that's who this mystery actor is. That's what I think is going on there. Is that it's a mystery actor, and you find out through the story and afterward that it's the gods. So then it's the gods of Egypt harden his heart, he hardens his heart. The gods of Egypt harden his heart, he hardens his heart. The gods of Egypt harden his heart. And then finally, God's like, you're clinging to this pantheon of Egyptian gods. I'm going to give you what you've chosen. You've chosen to harden your heart. I'm gonna help you with what you have chosen. And then the seventh one is interesting too, because it actually identifies both Pharaoh hardening his heart, and it says his heart was hardened. And so I feel like that's interesting because it's showing even after God demonstrated, I can harden your heart too, Pharaoh, identifies himself with that mystery actor that I believe is referring to the gods of Egypt. Then after that, it's a lot more God saying, like, you've chosen this way, I'm going to just escalate it. And then it's a lot more of God hardening Pharaoh's heart. Pretty much through the end, it is God that is hardening the heart from there, because Pharaoh's proven, like, I don't want to repent. And at some point, God says, okay, you have chosen this route, and I'm gonna allow you to go down that route. I'm even going to, help you down that route. And so I think that's really what we see going on here. There are different ideas of what's going on with that passage, but really that's kind of where I land. I see that you've got that mystery actor that is doing the hardening, and that is the object of the plagues, and I feel like it's really trying to bring all that together to say, as he was being manipulated by his gods, he was choosing his gods, they were working together to work against our God, and all of that piled up to God finally saying, okay, have it your way, let's harden your heart together. So that's at least my understanding of how that goes. I hope that kind of helps clarify some of those things. If you have more questions on this, please feel free to reach out, or other questions. I would love to have your questions so that we can talk through some of those things. Hope it's a blessing. Thanks, everyone.